People always ask me how I started writing a book or why I wrote a book or that they want to write a book and how did I get started. And it's funny, I live to serve. I live to change lives. My mission on life was always to transform lives on the greatest scale possible. Since my motorcycle accident, I say on the greatest scale possible with grace and ease, because I had to keep transforming my own life, which isn't so bad, but I feel like enough is enough. I've done enough. And during COVID, I really got with it where I was like, okay, now's the time I can write a book. So I took this writer's workshop with Hay House, and I used to travel everywhere where I always wanted to write a book, and I have all these notes, and I'm such a scholar. I tell people when you're screwing, you're eating, you're sleeping, I'm studying. I'm always working on my craft, always, 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 which is behavior, wellness, transforming lives, and what it takes to be amazing at it. That's why people always say, oh, you're a life coach, and I guess, but I don't have a life coaching certification. I have a master's in behavior. I have my NLP master practitioner license. I used to lead for Landmark Education, so I have a long 35-year list of credentials and licenses behind me. So I was always pseudo writing a book, but never really like a book. My thesis for my master's was 70 pages typed. It was actually putting higher order thinking in the early childhood years. And I thought that was a lot, and it was a lot. And I was like, a book? And I'm so wordy. And because I teach, I speak for the visual, the auditory, the kinesthetic. So I speak the same thing in different ways. And my divorce was very costly because I'm very wordy, and less words you do in your divorce, the cheaper it is. So I was like, how am I going to write a book and be concise? So I was always writing a book, and I was putting together this book called Wisdom of Her Own Ages, like a heroine, her own win. And that was going to be my first book. And I took this writer workshop course, and I'm like, not at the end of the book, but at the end of writing everything. Because I own a boxing gym and a girl in Miami Beach for almost 30 years, people are always like, how did you get into boxing? How did you start boxing? Oh, you taught in prison? Oh, you know Muhammad Ali? Oh, Mike Tyson? I wanted to be like, buy the book. So for 30 years, I had to keep telling the story over and over again. So I write this book about my whole history and teaching in jails and lockdowns and owning boxing gyms and being around all these Muhammad Ali and Mike Tyson and everybody, and just the whole story of what it took and running away at an early age. And so I have this whole book together, and the writer's workshop is like, no. First of all, they tell me two things that have me not do this book. First, they were like, nobody wants to know about you. They were like, nobody wants to know your story. So I was like, okay, but everyone that comes to my gym asks, and that was like a small percentage of the world that I want to change. And then they said, you're not allowed to talk about other people, because if you talk about other people, they either have to be dead or you have to ask their permission. And I had such a terrible divorce that made me who I am, and got right, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger, and made me super strong. I talked a lot about my divorce and what came about from it. And I was like, oh my God, there's no way I'm getting my ex-husband's permission to write this book. So I was like, do I throw this all out? I just wrote a whole book. Every time I was on a plane internationally, and I've been to probably over 60 countries, I was making jokes that I should call the book On a Plane, because it was always writing on a plane. You had to lock me down somewhere for 15 hours for me to like focus on writing. The hardest thing about writing a book is when you have inspiration, you don't have time. And when you have time, you don't have inspiration. And getting the two together is so difficult. And when you do, you become a perfectionist. Because when you get it together, the words are so final that you put on the page that you're like, let me read it over again. And you get all these tips from people, and people that teach you writers' workshops tell you, don't go back, just write, 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 write. Good luck with that. Like, I would go back. I was an English teacher. I want to go back. And then when you sit, which is the other hardest part for me, because I don't know how people write fiction, because you're in a different mood. I guess they channel the characters, but when you're in a different mood every time you sit. So when you sit, because you're in a different mood, your emotions, your thoughts, your words are all different, and then the tone becomes different. So that was a really hard thing for me, to pick up where I left off, keep the tone the same, keep the energy the same. So I was like, I'm going to throw out this whole book. I had like, it was probably over 350 pages I had. So instead of throwing it out, I turned it into a course. So I actually do group coaching and life coaching in groups on Zoom. And it's the premise and the foundation of my coaching, which I use for the 12 months. It's wisdom of her own ages, and it's 13 wisdoms that I have. So thank God I still use the book, which I turned into a course. So they said, no, you need something catchy first. You need something that like catches their attention, and then they'll want to learn more about you. So I'm like, oh, okay. I always wanted to write rules to boxing, like life according to the rules of boxing. I named it Life According to the Rules of Boxing because I own a boxing gym and because I teach boxing in life. And you can never see a YouTube motivational video without seeing a boxing scene. So boxers are champions and they're heroes and they come from adversity and they have grit, perseverance. They have so many ingredients that makes up a champion. And when I first learned about boxing, I thought it was just fighting. I didn't get that it's what turns boys into men and changes people's lives. And really, you go into a boxing gym to save your life. So I say God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. And I know I was always being qualified because I taught in jail when I was younger, in my early 20s, and I was always into the alternative ed, at-risk youth, and being my master's was behavior. I loved the disadvantaged kids. I loved being able to get kids in order that nobody else could do, and hence went my whole life, because I was always teaching kids boxing without knowing what boxing was, because I would let the kids fight. I would say, okay, you want to fight? There's 2 rules. You got to let me know first, and who it is. Like, I need to know who's fighting, and you got to let me know in advance, and I would facilitate it. I would move all the chairs away, I would open up the space, and I would allow the 2 people to fight. And it was amazing because I had reverse discrimination. I was the only white girl in all black schools, and everyone loved me, and they would always say, how does this little white girl get the kids in order? And I'd say, because I'm nice, and I like them, and I let them fight. I'd say, once I let them fight, there's no bullying, no one jumps in, because I was very clear that all those fights that happened in all these schools of so-called ghetto inner cities were, they gang up on each other. They'd all come in, they'd be kicking each other, ripping each other's hair out. People would be like, oh, you teach like Dangerous Minds? I'm like, worse. It was the worst what I had witnessed. And I single-handedly revamped that in my schools because I let them fight. And no one wants to fight one-on-one. Nobody wants to get in and fight. So hence went my life, right? Because after teaching, I could do school my way because I'm a disruptor and I didn't want to follow the rules of the school system because what they do does not work. So I realized I can have school my way. And I opened a gym in 1998, which is almost 30 years. And it's very world famous and very well known. And Muhammad Ali did birthdays there, and every boxer retired or trained there. Roberto Duran and Bernard Hopkins and Roy Jones and De La Hoya, and everybody is trained in my gym. Bo Jack retired in my gym. So I got to see all these greats and be around all these heroes who don't even know, right? It's like asking a lion what ferocious is. They'd be like, I don't know what ferocious is. We describe that a lion is ferocious, but a lion doesn't get their ferocious. So boxers didn't get that that's their job. That's what they did. So I studied these boxers and what it took for them. They didn't eat. In order to eat, they had to fight. So they would fight to eat. They come from adversity. And I came from adversity, right? So I ran away at 15 and had to fight for life on my own, where I had to pay for my school. I had to pay for everything. And my mom so-called put us in great schools, but we were disadvantaged in the sense that all my friends were not getting the shit beat out of them, and I was. So my mom was physically and emotionally abusive, and I wanted to run away. The quickest I can get out of my house, all I did as a child was have someone like, please take me home with you. I would see cars next to me and be like, please, can I go home with these people? I never wanted to go home to my house. It was very tumultuous, and just, I hate screaming. I hate yelling. It was a very loud screaming, yelling. My mom would beat the hell out of us. We never knew what her mood was for the day. So boxing saved my life, and it's how my modality of teaching, which is why I say God qualifies the called. I was called to do this job, this service, this transformation for the world. So now I write this book, 101 Rules, Life According to the Rules of Boxing. It started out with I was like, oh, should I do 50 rules? Should I do 80 rules? 75 rules? What's a cool number? And my employee lives where I live, and he would come in the house and he would get a headache because I had these index cards all over the floor with like the rules I would have, and then I get to 50, and then I'd be like, oh no, I have 55, and then I get to 75, and then it uncovers, just like I talk about meditation. I didn't have the book from day one. It started to uncover over time. So I finally did it where I was like, oh, 101. So it's 101 rules to being the champion of your life. It started as life according to the rules of boxing, and it still is. But it was unfortunate that so many people that didn't want to read about boxing were like, I don't want to read it. So when I switched it to 101 rules to being the champion of your life, more people were like, okay, I'll listen to it. And it's boxing. So it's all boxing in life. So originally I thought boxing is fighting, and it's not. It's where kids go, people go to save their lives, any age. We transform your life. My gym does that exponentially. And then I realized I can't serve people in China and Australia and New Zealand, and they're not in my boxing gym. Yet my boxing gym's in South Beach, so we have people transient from all over the world for 30 years, come year after year after year, and we have raving fans, and everyone loves it, because if I could really get you to know what you're going to get out of it from day one, you'd be paying me thousands a month, and everyone would vouch for it. But they don't, and they get their whole life out of it. Their whole life is transformed because of how I lead Landmark, and I was like a stand for transformation. I can be Landmark leader, transformation, distinction, gym owner. So I make sure everyone is transformed.